As the seasons change, the chores around the homestead do too. With the shift to colder weather, the leaves are changing, the animals are growing their winter coats, and we are preparing for the season ahead. In today's video, join me around the homestead as we finish up harvesting the garden crops, plant the garlic for next season, and continue working on our off-grid cabin build down in the woods. There's not much left growing in our garden this fall, but there still are a few things, and one of those things are squash. And the reason the squash are still in here is because the squash needs some extra time in the cooler temperatures to firm up their rind, and so you know squash is ready to harvest when you can take your thumbnail and push it against the skin, and if it breaks the skin, then it needs to stay on the vine a little longer to firm up, but if it's nice and tough, then you know it's ready to harvest. This variety here is called a warted green winter squash. It's the first time I have grown this variety of squash, and it turned out pretty good. The reason I grew it was because I was looking for sweet mama squash, which are my favorite. I couldn't find the seeds at the time, so I purchased these because the package said good for winter storage. However, later on I did find some sweet mama squash seeds, and I planted them, and I got a few sweet mamas to grow. They're my favorite squash to grow because they're so good at winter storage. They're similar taste to buttercup in my opinion, but I just like them because they store longer. So they're my favorite, and I'll finish up harvesting these. A few are not quite ripe yet, so I'll leave them on the vine and see if they harden up and ripen. There are also flowers left in the garden, and I've left the flowers in the garden because the bees love them so much. So this time of year, there's a few sunflowers left. The bees have loved the sunflowers all season. I have a couple dahlias left, and they're just beautiful to have the flowers and the bees enjoying them at the end of the season when there's not as many flowers for them to find. Mixed in with my flowers is also my herbs growing, and so I'm going to harvest my herbs and dry them for the winter. We've been eating our herbs all growing season, but now it's time to harvest what's left, and we'll hang them up to dry. So we have growing some rosemary. I also have growing in the garden some oregano, and there's just a little bit. I had another plant and it kind of overgrew the oregano, so just a little bit to harvest and dry. And there's also some basil I'll harvest. It's pretty gone by, but it's a little bit still salvageable. My favorite herb to grow is dill, and my dill did so well this year. I was really happy. Dill, I use it year-round for cooking, but I also use it a lot in the summer. As it's growing, I cut it back, and I'll use it in my dill pickles as my cucumbers are ready to go. And I've harvested a lot off these plants this year, but they keep coming back, so that's great. And today I'm going to harvest them completely, hang them to dry, and then I'll be able to put them into containers for the winter once they're dry. While I was harvesting the dill, I came across a stray onion. So I've harvested my onions a while ago, but this one was left in the garden. Also left in the garden are the carrots that we grew and our potatoes. And the reason these are still in the garden is because I've been waiting for the temperatures to get cool enough so that my cold room that I'm going to be storing these in is the right temperature. And also we haven't had any deep frosts yet, so they're okay in the ground. If you're interested in how we store our root crops without a root cellar, I'll leave a link to those videos I have made in the past, and it's always worked out really well for me. So in about a week or so, I'll come out, harvest all of our potatoes and carrots, and then move them into the cold room. Besides the few onions that I found in the garden today, I also had harvested some and let them dry. So you want your onions to cure or dry before you braid them. And I'll braid my onions up just like I braid hair. You'll put some 3 onions out, and then you're going to braid it down, adding in an onion every few crisscrosses. And after you have your onions braided, you can hang them up in your kitchen, and then we'll pull one off to use. If you have multiple braids, you can hang them in your cold room where you're going to put your potatoes and carrots and things like that. But I love how they look when they're all braided up and hanging in the homestead kitchen. So outside of the garden, we still have some things growing. We have our pumpkins growing and some gourds that just volunteered in our manure pile. And so here is one of these little white pumpkins that are a decorative gourd, and I'll pick this and just decorate for autumn with it. And also in here we have our sugar pie pumpkins, is the type of pumpkin we usually grow. A lot of them are green. There's only one that started to turn orange, but we're going to leave them in here, and they have a little while left to grow. And because it's on a manure pile, the pumpkins stay warm because as the manure decomposes, it gives off heat. It helps keep this area warmer for the pumpkins so they have a little bit longer time to grow even when it starts to get cold out. And they're a pretty hardy vegetable, so they're going to be able to stay out even after a few frosts. Now that the harvest is in, we're going to work on planting some garlic. So garlic is planted in the fall and it stays dormant in the ground all winter and then will grow in the spring. And I'm planting mine this year in our raspberry patch, and I made this raspberry patch a few years back, and I'm using this area because it had some empty space and it was fenced in. So we have to fence in all of our vegetables because the deer will eat it and our goat will eat it. So this is just some manure that we brought in and piled up, and it's decomposed manure. The garlic that we're planting this year is a hardneck variety, and we just got it from our local co-op. Ideally, you would plant enough garlic one year so that you could use it and then have enough to plant the following year. But every year we end up using all our garlic, so we have to go out and buy some more. And hopefully this year we'll have enough that we won't have to buy any next year. So what I'm going to use to plant the garlic is this little tool. It looks kind of like a carrot. My sister calls it my carrot tool. And it was made by a local craftsman at our market. And each section is an inch long, so I can use it to measure my spacing. And it also works really well for making the hole to plant the garlic in. So each section is an inch long, and you want to plant your garlic about 2 inches deep. So to plant the garlic, you first need to break apart the heads. And you're going to break each clove off of the head of garlic. You want to leave some paper on, but you can take a little bit of the extra off. And as you break it apart, you want to make sure that you don't get down to the white flesh. If you happen to break it down too far and you get down to the soft white part, then you know that you need to put that aside and cook with it. And as you're taking it apart, any that have all the paper on still and aren't exposed to that soft section are good to plant in the garden. You just don't want it to rot or to shrivel up if it's not protected by that outer layer. So just use that for cooking. I decided to separate all my garlic cloves first and then plant them. It just made it a bit of a faster process for myself. Once I had all my garlic separated, I then went on to planting them. To plant them, I'm making a little line in the soil with my little stick, and I'm going to be planting them 6 inches apart, like a 6-inch by 6-inch grid, and approximately 2 inches deep. We live in a very cold climate. We're in New Brunswick, Canada, so I'm going to go a little extra deep on these, and I possibly will also cover up everything with straw when I'm done, just to give it an extra protection layer. They're going to freeze, but this way we'll just have them nice and deep. If you don't have a fancy tool like this, you can just use a stick or your hands. I just find it makes my process go a lot faster. So I'm just going to go along and make all the holes first. It makes it a lot faster. After my holes are made, then I'm going to put my garlic in, and then I'll cover it all up and repeat the process. You can plant a lot of garlic in a small space, which I really like, and I find that once you plant it, it's not very much work. The only thing you have to think about is it's helpful to weed the garlic in the springtime so that they don't have competition for growing. And so you want to make sure you can reach the middle of your bed from the edges. This is a little bit maybe wide, but it'll work for us. So I think I planted approximately 77 cloves here, and I have a full other bag. So we'll probably end up getting about 150 cloves. Ideally, I would probably plant double this, but every year I seem to never get enough. So next year I'm going to have to get a little more, and I think I say that every year. But when you're planting your garlic, you want to put the flat end down. That's going to be where the roots grow out, and the pointy end up, because that's where the plant's going to come out of the clove. And that one clove will turn into a full head of garlic. While I was planting my garlic, I had some company watching me. This is Willow. She's one of the horses that is younger. She's only 4, and so she was very inquisitive about what I was doing over in the dirt. And she watched me the whole time. She's getting really fluffy for winter, and so are the other horses. Everyone's getting ready for the cold seasons to come. And so is our cow. She's getting ready for winter. And one way we're getting ready for winter with her is that we bred her for the first time artificially. and we bred her to a black Angus cow, and our hope is that we'll get a little beef calf in the spring. If it took, we're not sure. It's our first time doing it, so we'll have to see if she is pregnant, but that would be really exciting. The chickens are enjoying one of their last days out on the grass. Before winter comes, they usually will stay in the coop more in the wintertime. I'm now heading down to our off-grid cabin that we're working on building in the woods. And we were hoping to have our cabin ready to move in by winter, but if you have ever built anything yourself, you might be able to relate to the fact that it usually takes longer than you think it's going to take. So we're working slow and steady on our cabin, but it's not ready to move into quite yet. So today what we're working on is we're going to be putting some wood on the walls. We've put this wood on other walls in our cabin, but today we're working out in the main room, which is very tall. It's 2 stories high, and it's out by our loft. And because of this, we need to have the staging. So the staging's set up, and we are going to be passing the boards up and putting them on the wall. So Eric and I are taking turns cutting the boards to length. Then we're sanding them, and then we're using our arrow nailer to nail them on the wall. The reason we're sanding them is because these boards are rough cut boards, so they're spruce boards, 1x6, and they're rough lumber. And the reason why we chose to go with rough lumber over something like tongue and groove is because it's a lot cheaper, and it really only takes us a few extra minutes to sand the board and pass it up. And so for us, the cost savings made it worth it, even though it takes a little extra time. And we really like how the wood has turned out. It has a bit of a rustic look to it, and we kind of like that. Since our cabin is a little off-grid cabin in the woods, it has a nice cozy feel. You're a good girl, Ruby. We're working on putting the wood on the wall behind the wood stove, and because of this, we're going to need to add in some type of hearth or something that is heat resistant behind the stove, and that will be to come in a future video. We're planning on putting something similar to what's under the stove. We made a hearth pad out of just rocks we found around the cabin, and we're thinking we're going to do something very similar behind it on the wall to protect the wood from the heat from the stove. As the boards are going up, our cat and dog are enjoying hanging out in the cabin and watching us work. They like to play around in here, and I think they prefer days when we have a fire on, but today we're not putting a fire on because we're working so closely to the stove. Once this wall is done, we're moving on to the other wall over by the stairs, and I had to head up to make a cake for father-in-law's birthday, and so my grandfather came down to work with Eric, and they're putting up the wood on the wall behind the staircase. Once we have all the wood on the walls, we're going to clear coat them, and so we'll need to leave the staging up so that we can put those clear coats on. And then I'm very excited. Once we finish putting the wood on and we get the clear coat on, we'll be able to move the staging, and that's just going to make the place feel so much bigger, and I'm excited for that step. If you're interested in seeing how our cabin build comes along and following along with our homesteading journey, we'd love to have you subscribe and follow along with our channel. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.